All right, what's going on, everyone? Let's jump into some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 8:30 a.m. Central Time on Thursday, October 19th, 2023. The Israel air war has continued over Gaza, and over the last 48 hours, they've announced that three high-value targets have been removed from the battlefield. The IDF said that Iman Nofal, who served as the commander of the Hamas Central Camps Brigade, was killed, as well as Mohammed Abdallah, the commander of Hamas's anti-tank missile system in the Gaza City Brigade, and finally, Akram Hijazi of the Hamas naval forces, as well as an arms and terror funds dealer, was eliminated in these recent strikes. The Gaza Health Ministry has put out that 3,785 Palestinians have so far been killed in these Israeli strikes. And again, a note, the Gaza Health Ministry, all of that information is going to be funneled through Hamas. So technically, it's a different organization, but Hamas is the entity in charge of everything in Gaza. They're the ones that would provide those data points and vet them as they reach the outside world. Now, that number has spiked significantly in the last few days, the 3,785 killed. Likely, the reason for that is that Hamas is including what they say were 500 people killed during an Israeli strike on a hospital a couple days ago. Now, more information has come out on that front, but hopefully a lesson learned for a lot of people here is just how significant the information aspect is in modern war. This story right away spiraled out of control, and I think a lot of information has come in over the past couple days to help people better understand exactly what happened or what didn't happen. But just perusing the internet a little bit, I would say some people's minds are already made up. A lot of that has to do with who you believe, who you trust. There's no independent reporters on the ground in Gaza, so people are left determining what is fact between what the IDF says and what Hamas says. And personally, it seems like people made up their minds long ago. So whatever either side says is kind of perceived as truth. Now, diving into that specific attack, first off, this is not an area of expertise for me, like the forensic analysis of especially gathering information off of the internet to come to a conclusion. That's not an area that I would consider myself an expert, not by a long shot. However, there is a handful of things that kind of stood out to me when looking at some of this information. So for starters, Hamas announced right away that 500 people had been killed, which is tragic. And I have no doubt that some people were killed. It's just too densely packed an area. Every time there's a detonation, every time there's an explosion, there's likely someone killed. It's just the tragic nature of this war. 500 is not very believable. So if you look at some of the images and the videos that came out of the parking lot that was hit next to the hospital, another little piece here, but important. It wasn't a hospital that was hit, but a parking lot next to it. The area was pretty sanitized as the sun came up the morning after the strike. And if there were 500 people killed in that small of an area, it's likely that another 500 were wounded. But even if we just say the only casualties were the 500 killed, cleaning up 500 bodies is a monumental task. It takes days in peacetime. In the middle of a war, the idea that they were able to, again, sanitize that entire area of bodies and the gore that would have been produced in just a few hours in the dark, it's not very realistic. So again, I have no doubt that any explosion inside of Gaza is probably killing people, but 500 does not seem very realistic. And right out the gate, that seemed, at the very least, a bit exaggerated. Now, since the strike has occurred, I haven't seen much from Hamas in terms of evidence to show that the IDF did this outside of, there's been some reporting with doctors pointing to the victims, again, showing a handful of bodies, a handful of wounded, which likely did occur. Of course, the individuals there don't suggest that 500 was the number or that the IDF carried it out. On the other side, the IDF has put forward a massive campaign trying to prove their innocence in this matter. So it's been interesting to see the difference there, right? Very little information other than just a statement from Hamas, and the IDF going to extreme lengths to prove their innocence. So what I've seen coming out of IDF at this point, again, because you're either getting your information realistically in terms of official data from the conflict from Hamas or from IDF, and then a bunch of independent analysts looking at stuff on the internet. The IDF has put out some videos showing the rockets being fired from Hamas territory. they show, or from Gaza, they show what appears to be one of those rockets failing to launch, falling out of the sky, which isn't crazy. It's happened before, whether it's Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Hamas. They've had rockets fail to launch in the past. They've had rockets fail to launch or fall out of the sky during this series of fighting. I mean, we've seen that happen in Ukraine and Russia, and they're using military-grade equipment. Hamas at times is patching together rockets with water pipes and, exploded Israeli ordnance. Is it any surprise that some of those failed to launch? Right? Like it happens. The IDF has also released, of course, some imagery, some overhead imagery of the area before and after the strike. That's one of the ways to look at some of the cleanup that happened so quickly, if you will. And they did release a phone call supposedly between two either Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters talking about the strike and kind of saying, we got a problem. It failed to launch. It landed short. It struck near the hospital. It's just been one thing after another from the IDF showing how this was in all likelihood a rocket and not in line with what a bomb strike would look like. Now, on that note, I did see a picture circulating showing craters. People looking at this, trying to determine, was it a crater from a JDAM, a Joint Direct Attack Munition, or not? And the picture going around shows this giant, 10-foot crater in the ground. That's not realistic, for what it's worth. If you drop a JDAM or any bomb with a delay fuse in soft soil, sure, maybe you can get there. But in a paved parking lot, even a point detonating fuse or definitely a proximity fuse, you're not going to see that sort of cratering. So the fact that there's not a 10-foot crater in the ground does not definitively point to it not being a bomb. Some of the things that do, however, would be the lack of shrapnel, some vehicles in the immediate area of where it looks like the rocket landed or the munition landed. Some of the cars look relatively undamaged other than being burned out, which again, not in line with what you would expect from a JDAM, 500-pound bomb or larger. So again, personal opinion, there's just a ton of information out there. From what I've seen, it looks like a Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Hamas rocket fell out of the sky, had a operating error like they've had so many times in the past. It fell in the parking lot, and the fuel then lit fire after the small warhead would have detonated and burned out a lot of that area. I have no doubt that there were civilian casualties, which is tragic. But again, personal opinion, that's what it looks like to me as of now. But I would raise the question, how much does it matter? Because that narrative went around so fast, so quickly, and I wonder how many people are going to see some of the corrections, or how many people are going to be interested today, tomorrow, or a week from now on as more of the facts come out here versus the initial narrative of Israel killed 500 civilians by striking a hospital. That's sensational. That gets clicks. That I've still seen that showing up in headlines and on social media. So it's, that sentiment is still there. Again, the information aspect of this war is staggering. Now, President Biden traveled to Israel yesterday, October 18th. He spoke with some Israeli leaders. The big things that came out of that, it wasn't really anything unexpected. He voiced U.S. support for Israel, saying that the desire to go in and take the fight to Hamas was understandable. He urged caution, calling about or referencing some of our actions post 9/11 and how we maybe took some steps that didn't help our cause. And I've spoken to that before, just the concern of, there's not a lot of international support for Hamas right now. Again, if you take Iran out of the equation, you're not finding countries around the world saying Hamas is the good guy. We need to defend Hamas. But there is a lot of global support for the Palestinian people and for limiting civilian casualties. And I think that's probably what President Biden was getting at here, is just be careful as you kick this operation off, or as you continue this war, to limit issues that could lead to an escalation of the conflict, or just the conflict continuing indefinitely because we're creating, or Israel's creating, more fighters through these civilian casualties. And the last piece that President Biden hit on, and I'm taking this with a big grain of salt, is the idea of humanitarian aid flowing into Gaza. It still hasn't as of this recording. Again, we're largely looking at the Rafah Gate with Egypt. But this would be the second or third time, maybe more, that we've heard that the gate is about to open, aid is about to flow in, and it's a priority, and it just hasn't happened. So that's one of those where until it happens, it's hard to speculate anymore at this point. Now, moving on to some external actors here, along with the United States, there's been continued Hezbollah strikes to the north coming out of Lebanon against Israel, and Israel has responded by striking back at Hezbollah targets inside of Lebanon. Hezbollah has said since the October 7th attack, since Hamas's October 7th attack, that 11 of their fighters have so far been killed by Israeli forces. There have also been Israeli forces killed and wounded up north. Those are kind of trickling out 1 and 2 at a time. It's hard to dial in how many Israeli casualties there have been in the north, but it's been on both sides. Fortunately, at this point, it's been relatively small-scale fighting, but it does look like the United States is looking at that northern front, maybe concerned that this is where this thing could escalate in the very short term. So there was a report that came out saying that 2 U.S. officials said that Secretary of State Anthony Blinken told Arab leaders in the region with whom he'd met in recent days, again, he had a recent trip all throughout the Middle East, that the U.S. is, quote, not fooling around by sending so many military assets to the region in support of Israel. And kind of what he's getting at there is the idea that these aircraft carriers aren't there just to, show solidarity, but they will actually strike targets and be used for military purposes should the need arise. The report continues saying the scenario of using U.S. military force if Hezbollah were to join the war has come up in several White House meetings in recent days, the officials said. They added that any decision to use force would be made according to the scope of a Hezbollah attack and Israel's ability to respond. So not to be alarmist at all here, but based off of these comments and some recent events, it does feel like we're closer to U.S. involvement in a broader regional war today than we were any time in the past week or so since this thing kicked off. Now, it's worth noting that some of these veiled threats, if you will, about the U.S. striking Hamas targets or Hezbollah targets if need be, it's worth noting that that hasn't come up directed at Hamas and it has not come up directed at Iran. I mean, there's been some people commenting on how we need to attack Iran, but nothing this specific, saying how the U.S. is actually thinking of ways to attack Hezbollah. And the report wraps up by saying the 2 U.S. officials stress the administration is doing all it can to keep Hezbollah out of the war, but is also preparing for the opposite scenario. Look, we're kind of at a tipping point in this war, and I don't want to overplay that, but it does seem like there's a handful of different ways that this could go over the course of the next couple days, really, right? One of the major ones is if Hezbollah decides to kick off something of their own, which seems likely. There's a lot of reasons that they would want to take advantage of Israel being distracted in Gaza, not the least to come to the aid of their friends Hamas. Of course, another big concern is what Iran is going to do. How are they going to react as this war continues to unfold? And as we sit here today, we're still waiting for what most people expect to be an Israeli ground invasion of Gaza. So things have kind of settled into place a little bit, right? There hasn't been any major escalation in the last 10 days, which was a big concern, but it feels like we're waiting on 2 or 3 other things that could drop really any minute here and really dictate the direction this war goes. And the last item here, kind of sticking with the external actor piece, the Pentagon put out, or CENTCOM put out on October 18th, that in the past 24 hours, the U.S. military has defended against 3 drones near U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq. They say in western Iraq, U.S. forces engaged 2 drones, destroying one and damaging the second, resulting in minor injuries to coalition forces. Now, there's a couple things missing from this report that CENTCOM did not put out. First is assigning the responsibility for these drones to any organization or country. And the second is the type of drone or what they were actually doing, right? So we don't know if these were little off-the-shelf quadcopters locally launched with very short range, or if there was something more substantial, like loitering munition designed to crash into and destroy a target. This is likely what we could expect if Iran decided to escalate the conflict in the short term, right? Drones, rockets, maybe missiles, small arms fire, things like that. Generally things that have plausible deniability for Iran. They can pin it on their many proxy forces across Iraq, Syria, and the broader Middle East, where there are U.S. and coalition forces stationed. And I wouldn't be, this looks relatively minor. A couple drones shot down, not a big deal. We have the resources there to be able to do it. I wouldn't brush it aside too quickly, though. Just, Iran has a lot of support across portions of these countries, and it's nothing that the U.S. military couldn't handle, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that we might have to supplement those forces or add additional combat power into some of the U.S. and coalition forces bases in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere in order to deter these attacks if they continue, if they escalate. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack once a week, 7 to 10 of the top articles, along with podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.